Well, when I was president, that was 1989 to 1993, I was at the University of Chicago. And in fact, I've spent, since I got my PhD, I've been at Chicago, so that's an easy question. Um, this is a lean and mean operation here at the Physics Center. And the backbone of the support, not the only support, but the real backbone is the NSF grant. And part of this being a lean and mean operation is there are potentials for single point failure. So every, I can't remember if it's 3 or 5 years, we have to write a big proposal to the National Science Foundation explaining all the great things that we've done, the workshops that we've supported, the great advances that have come. And of course, that's the hardest part, because theoretical physics, we are really setting the agenda not for next year or not for 5 years out, but for 10 or 30 years out. And so it's hard to get that brag list up there right away. When the center supported, Howe's the string theorists in the early 70s, the first string revolution didn't come for 15 years. So you put together this proposal, and it's for 5 years. You have a committee. Sometimes the committee helps. When I had to do the 5-year proposal, we were very close to a single point failure. The committee didn't give much help, and I was in bed because of a back problem. I had been confined to bed. Of course, I had nothing better to do, and there I was laying on my stomach with my laptop writing this proposal. And then once you have the proposal, every once in a while we would go to NSF to try to explain to them in person, to go to the assistant director for math and physical sciences, not just the division director of physics, but to go one level higher, to say this is a great place and this is a great bargain, and we need the support. The program officer at NSF in charge of the Physics Center, which for years was Boris Kaiser, was extremely supportive. But if you want to get a big boost, you need to go to the next level if you want to get support from more than one division. And so Eric Weinberg and I and a couple others went to talk to the assistant director for math and physical science and explain how great a thing Aspen was and how great a place it was. And we were wildly successful. We boosted the funding from something like $250,000 per year to a little over $300,000. But that is such a bargain when you look at it. There are many principal investigators, individual scientists at institutions around the country who get an NSF grant of that magnitude. And here we are putting on this whole summer program. And so that's a ritual that happens every so many years. I can't remember if it's 3 or if it's 5. It's very important because that backbone of support is what we really count on. Of course, we get support from NASA, DOE, private donors, NIH now, but it's really that NSF money that we count on, pays Jane's salary, keeps us going, which is so important. And NSF, very, very competitive. The success rate at NSF now is in the 20% range. And so, the president and the board are always a little bit nervous that maybe somebody will say, we did that for 40 years, time to move on. But I think we are viewed as something unique and special. And then, of course, the winter meeting is even harder because you do about the same amount of work to get $10,000 or $15,000, and you got to do it every year. And those are typically done by the organizers of the people who want to run there's a committee that runs the winter meeting, and so they have to sort of put pressure on the organizers, write me some paragraphs, and this is really a hand-to-mouth operation. Sometimes the proposals get in time. I remember one time Boris called me. I got a phone call from Boris. I was no longer president. I got a phone call from Boris, and I was in Kathmandu, and he said, if you expect NSF to give you the money for this year. You've got to get in your, your progress report. You've got people who are volunteers who are first and foremost excited about their own work. And if they weren't excited about their own work, if they weren't making great contributions there, they wouldn't be able to bring to the center the scientific leadership, the energy, the magnetism that brings people from around the country. And so, it's like a fighter plane. Fighter planes are unstable. Well, that's a feature and a bug. Because they're unstable, they're able to maneuver very rapidly. Because this center, is unstable and always ready to fall one way or the other, it's able to respond very rapidly to the science. It's able to respond very rapidly to getting new people here. And of course, one of the big issues that NSF was always concerned about is this a club? And one of the most impressive statistics that we have here is that every year about 30-some% are first-timers. Now, how we do that, I think may involve some Enron bookkeeping. I don't know. No, it doesn't. But it is, we constantly renew ourselves, and we constantly, if anything, we're guilty of, killing our elders. I was president from 89 to 93, and the biggest issue was the land. And in the late 1980s, we had a serious situation confronting us. The ownership of the Meadows was very obscure. The land had passed from R.O. Anderson to somebody whose name who I can't remember, to Mohammed Hadid, a group of investors led by Mohammed Hadid. And they had great plans for developing the Meadows, tens of houses. We did not own the land that we sat on. We thought we owned the buildings, and our attorney, who I'll come back to in a minute, Nick McGrath, it's not clear that you can own buildings if you don't own the land. So it was a time of danger. There were sharks in the water. The other people who were involved with us, in addition to the developer, was the Aspen Institute in Music, was in the same boat. And the president of the Aspen Institute was an interesting individual named David McLaughlin, who we would probably all agree was a shark in the water, and the relationship between the center and the Institute had never been great. During that period, the city council had to work out a plan. And the city council was very interesting. At that time, it was led by Bill Sterling, really a remarkable individual. I think he will get a lot of credit for getting this worked out. And the council was undergoing change from highly non-growth to more sympathetic to growth. And you had the developer, you had music. We had a real nice ally in music when Robert Harth took over music. And then we had David McLaughlin, who was not exactly an ally. And so I remember my presidency going to a lot of planning and zoning meetings, a lot of city council meetings. And at the end of the day, we now have about 3 acres of land, which we own, Aspen land. And I don't know what 3 acres is worth. But it was a very complex process. And I think what really got us through this was 3 things. Number one, we were able to articulate what we wanted. What we wanted was unbelievably simple and resonated with Aspen. We wanted a circle of serenity where we could do our work. And so to be able to articulate that, and everybody in town, physicists, what do they want? Circle of serenity. Music, what do they want? They want a practice facility. Number 2, the town felt good about us because we had never really asked for money. We had never really asked for anything. We were low impact. And one of the things that really helped was that the lecture series that we created, that Peter Kaus created, and then we later named after Heinz Pagels, because they couldn't quite articulate what it was that was good about us. And that lecture series, countless city council meetings where people would stand up and say good things about the physicists, and they'd say, they give us those lectures. And then number 3, a tactical decision, a strategic decision was made that we were going to have to be a player, that we couldn't just sit back and say, we don't have any money, we're going to let the Institute's lawyers lead this, or music's lawyers. And so we made the decision that we'd be willing to spend a lot of money by our standards and be a player. And so our guy, our shark, was Nick McGrath. And the physicists really loved Nick McGrath as a lawyer because in some sense he was a string theorist of lawyers. So he was always interested in the bigger, subtle issues, and we'd go meet with Nick and we'd get off on some obscure tangent of some obscure piece of law. But the connection with Nick was fantastic because I forget who he clerked for. He clerked for one of the Supreme Court justices, and he was an intellectual equal of the physicists. And he was also a very tough lawyer, and he represented us. And so during that four years, those 3 things, being willing to step up to the bar and put money in and put our lawyer in, the circle of Serenity, that's all we wanted. That was a good thing. And we were the physicists who gave the lectures that did something for the town. And so during that time, George played a tremendous role. George, what I've discovered is George's relationship with the Physics Center is that he stays off to the side, and when needed, he jumps in. And so George saw that he was needed during this period of time. George and Jeremy and I would go to the meetings and, try to figure out what we should say, what we shouldn't say. And all the dust settled towards the end of '92 or the beginning of '93, where a remarkable agreement was met. The things at the Physics Center, how they're decided is never quite clear. Some of it traces to Peter and the creation of something he called the endowment fund, which in the early days, now I think it's closer to endowment. In the early days, it was a war chest. The wise people that be, I think George said, we can no longer sit on the sideline. We're going to have to pay for our share of the meals. We're going to have a lawyer. I think we were spending something like $50,000 a year on legal fees. And a stunning agreement was reached with all the parties. It allowed some development, 4 houses. It allowed for most of the Meadows to go to ACES. It allowed for us to get our land. It allowed for a very goofy arrangement, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So defeat was almost snatched from the jaws of victory. We had this plan worked out. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was Michael Gassman, an architect who was on council. Probably got the name wrong, but we had this plan worked out. And he looked at it and it was goofy because both 7th Street and 8th Street fed in to the Meadows. And he said, this just doesn't look right. And Bill Sterling started getting cold feet, maybe we should. And what's great is that didn't happen. But what's really great about it is every time I bicycle down 7th or 8th Street, this goofy arrangement, it will remind us of how people came together. Nobody quite got what they wanted. Hadid and his group didn't get all the houses they wanted. We got houses sort of next to us, but the racetrack was preserved. And at the end of the day, I think this is really what democracy and community planning is all about, is that the practical side of Americans came forward and we settled this mess. And we have a healthier music. They got their practice facility, which is now Harris Hall. It was never meant just to be a practice facility, but that's how it was sold. We got a new music tent. We've got a campus here. Of course, what happened once we got the land, we started thinking about Well, now that we have our land and know what our property is, what are we going to do about Hilbert? It's not going to be here forever. And talked about getting Betcher, and that was sort of an amazing thing. Well, I wish I had gone up and looked up some of the detail, but the main detail was endless meetings, complete confusion, and you never knew which was an important meeting. And David McLaughlin was always wanting us to sign some damn piece of paper. Robert Harth coming along was so good because he was a really down-to-earth guy. We now had a 2-to-1 alliance. The final solution for the Meadows was really quite marvelous. I mean, nobody got everything they want, but I think everybody got something that was workable, and the city got itself out of a big messy situation that could have ended up with tons of houses in this beautiful piece of Aspen. So music got their land and the right to build a rehearsal facility, which everybody knew wasn't going to be a rehearsal facility, which turned out to be Harris Hall. We got about 3 acres. And the right to, somehow George had gotten words, or Nick had gotten words in there about the right to maybe replace buildings or even build another building. The Institute got their land. The developers got the right to build a few houses. And I think what we have today is, it's classic American pragmatism, compromise. We have something that's workable, and we didn't let the perfect be the enemy of the very, very good. And once the land was settled, of course, then we knew what our turf was, and we could start thinking about our campus. And of course, the weak point of the campus was Hilbert Hall, this temporary building that Bob Wilson had built that was supposed to last for a few years, that had, 3/4 of the offices. It also blocked our view of the racetrack and the Meadows, which we never really appreciated at the time. And so at that point in time, David McLaughlin did one final nice thing for us. We had been using for a number of summers one of their buildings next door called Betcher. And it helped us with overflow. It was an existing building. And so I approached David and asked if they would be willing to sell Betcher. And it was a building that it wasn't really on their campus. And thank goodness that David came back with a ridiculous answer. I don't even remember, but they wanted $1 million or something for it. And so it immediately settled the issue. We did not want Betcher. And we started thinking about the campus, and what we realized is it would be goofy to have Betcher. It's not really part of our campus. It's not great space. It's not organized the way we want it. But David really did this wonderful favor by after we had struggled through working together, the battle to get the land settled, sort of saying, we'll give you a special deal, $1 million. And so we started thinking about a new building. And I had a couple of contributions to that. I think my main contribution was to tell the nominating committee there is a force of nature located in Chicago who has not much to do right now. And he loves Aspen, and that's David Schramm, and you ought to make him chairman of the board, and you ought to unleash him on this. And David really went to town and had enormous vision. When it came time to think about architects, I can't remember who the finalists were, but David already knew who the architect was going to be, and that was Harry Teague. And we interviewed these firms, and there was a small committee trying to select the architect, and we took a straw vote, which went very badly for David. But it was only a straw vote. And David had the right answer. Harry Teague was the guy. And Harry was really much better than his reputation. And when we agreed that he would be the architect, he came out here and spent weeks. And he interviewed everyone. About the same time, something was going on in Santa Barbara with their new building. And they got this guy, Michael Graves. And as best as I can tell, Michael Graves called one or two people and built a building based upon their pointy view. Harry came out, hung out, talked to everyone, got contradictory advice. You know, people would tell him, you know, we need completely open office space so everybody can interact all the time. Others would say, no, we need quiet space. And so he really put it all together. Harry did this brilliant thing of saying, you know, you don't want to build the new building here where Hilbert is. If you kind of build it where we ended up building it, it'll close in your campus. And you won't know that you're in a town, and you'll be able to see the Meadows. And so Dave was right. He approached this with the enthusiasm that he approached everything in life. Eric Goinberg and I early on really gave Dave enormous grief because Dave kept wanting to launch. You know, you go to a cocktail party and somebody might want to give him a loan to start the construction. And, you know, Eric and I provided a little bit of ballast saying, well, you know, maybe we need a little more of a commitment than that. But his enthusiasm, his connections, his vision, his ability to see that, you know, there was only one architect who could do this place, and it was Harry. And, you know, Harry did a fantastic job. He really captured, you know, the smart is the hard building because it's so damn big. And I remember the first time walking down the corridors, and I thought, you know, this is not a big building. And then I had to walk back, and I realized by the jogs and various tricks and the lighting and the offices captured the worry that many of us had that Harry would make this too fancy. And he kept the simplicity, the sliding doors, and I liked it. Harry probably never thought of it this way, but the sliding doors to me were the metaphor for getting it right about the interaction level. So he heard people who wanted to be totally interactive, people who wanted to be private. So he had this sliding door so you could adjust continuously your connection. It also solved a problem that we were really needed to keep the square footage down, to keep the price down. And if you have a door that opened into the office, it took up, so it was brilliant. Astrophysics wasn't one of the original focuses of the center. Certainly Hans Bethe's presence meant that there was some astrophysics here, but if you look at the center today, it's sort of a third astrophysics, a third condensed matter, a third particle physics, and how we got there is sort of an interesting path which kind of speaks to how Aspen works. And there's some prehistory. I first started coming in '79, and my understanding is that astrophysics arrived in a big way with a workshop that was organized by David Pines and Gordon Boehm in 1969 on neutron stars and pulsars. And Sterling Colgate wasn't invited, but happened upon it. And by the early '70s, Sterling and others had convinced NASA to fund workshops here that were of a very different character. They were 3 weeks, 9 to 5. I think maybe they were able to sneak Fridays off after a while. The topics were coordinated with with NASA. And astrophysics was sort of sequestered into 3 weeks, separate grant and so on and so forth. And so that was kind of the 1970s. And then in the 1980s, there was kind of a breakout. And of course, like all things at the Physics Center, it was driven by science. And the science here, I think, involved the interface, the growing interface between astrophysics, cosmology, and particle physics. And the particle physicists started getting really interested in things involving the early universe. And I was involved in a number of them, but we started having workshops, you know, cosmology and particle physics, inflation, cosmic strings, dark matter, dark energy, so on and so forth. And by the end of the 1980s, when I became president, astrophysics got mainlined, or mainstreamed, I should say, so that there was no set 3 weeks that was guaranteed to astrophysics. So I took a bunch of grief as president from the astrophysicists, but the upside was the integration of the science. And if you now look at the center, roughly a third, this summer a little more, of the workshops are on astrophysics. And if you look at the participants, likewise. And so astrophysics kind of snuck in while the particle physicists and condensed matter physicists were battling each other and worrying about, is the balance right between particle and condensed matter. The astrophysicists snuck in there. Nobody was worried about them. And all of a sudden, by 1990, we have an astrophysicist as president. We have a chairman of the board, Dave Schramm, who's an astrophysicist. And so astrophysics became a full partner. But I think, again, it was the science that really drove it. If the science had not been there, regardless of the individuals that you had, it would not have thrived. One of the great things about the Physics Center is that it serves a wonderful rite of passage for young scientists. So I remember in 1979, Dave Schramm urged me, get out of Chicago during the summer. And there was a workshop on a topic I was working on, gravitational waves. And Don Lamb, I believe, was one of the organizers. And, it's hard to get in the first time at Aspen. And I waited till the last minute because I thought it was so important. And the doors that were opened up, you come here and you get to be exposed to the senior people in the field. More importantly, they get to be exposed to you. And the science ideas, I came here for the gravity wave workshop. I spent most of my time worrying about topics on the early universe. I bumped into Gordon Boehm, and he said, tell me about the, early universe and particle physics. And it is extremely important in the careers of young scientists. The connections they make, the exposure their ideas get. And I suspect that many young scientists would have the same story to tell that I do, where I feel that an important part of, moving along, the track from postdoc to assistant professor to tenure involved the Aspen Center for Physics and the unique environment that it gives you. You're exposed to scientists, senior scientists from all over the world, and on an informal basis, on a formal basis, and I think that's an extraordinary role that the center plays.